Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. And before we dive into today's video, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to stop whatever you are doing, put down whatever is in your hands, and give me your complete and undivided attention, because what I am about to share with you in this video is the kind of information that most people go their entire lives without ever knowing, the kind of information that could, and I mean this with complete seriousness, completely and permanently rewrite your financial story, if you happen to be one of the lucky few who has the right coin sitting in the right place at home right now. We are talking today about the 1930 Dewey penny, a coin so extraordinarily rare, so deeply significant in the world of American numismatics, so passionately pursued by the most serious and financially committed collectors on the planet, that in its finest, rarest, most exceptional known form it has been valued at a figure so staggering it almost defies comprehension. $501 million. $501 million. For a penny. A 1-cent coin struck at the Denver Mint during one of the darkest and most desperate years in American history. And I promise you, every single dollar of that valuation has a story, a reason, and a history worth understanding completely. But before we go any further into the extraordinary world of the 1930 Dewey penny, I need to tell you something important, because today's video doesn't end with this coin. Oh no! We have coins coming up later in this video that carry their own jaw-dropping stories, their own mind-bending secrets, their own hidden errors and varieties that have driven collectors absolutely wild for decades. There is a coin coming up that involves a post-war mystery, so compelling that specialists have debated it for generations. There is another coin whose survival story is so against all odds that finding one in pristine condition is considered one of the great numismatic miracles of the modern era. So do not, I repeat, do not, click away after this first coin, because everything that comes next is going to build on what you learn right here and take you deeper into the most fascinating rabbit hole in all of American coin collecting. Now, let's talk about 1930. The year 1930 was, without question, one of the most devastating and historically significant years in the entire 20th century. The Great Depression, that catastrophic economic collapse that began with the stock market crash of October 1929, was now in full, terrible force across the United States and spreading rapidly around the world. Banks were failing at an alarming rate. Unemployment was skyrocketing, with millions of American workers suddenly finding themselves without jobs, without income, without prospects, standing in bread lines and soup kitchen queues that stretched around city blocks. The optimism and prosperity of the Roaring Twenties had evaporated almost overnight, replaced by a grinding, desperate poverty that touched virtually every corner of American life. Farmers were being driven off their land. Families were losing their homes. The entire economic infrastructure of the most powerful nation on earth was shaking at its foundations. And in that environment, in that atmosphere of fear and scarcity and uncertainty, the United States Mint was producing coins. The Denver Mint, specifically, was operating under conditions that were dramatically different from the previous decade. With the economy contracting sharply, the demand for circulating coinage was actually decreasing in many sectors as commerce slowed and people hoarded what little money they had. The Denver Mint's production of the 1930 Dewey penny reflected this economic reality in a way that would have profound numismatic consequences for nearly a century to come. The mintage figures for the 1930 Dewey penny are, by the standards of the Lincoln Cent series, remarkably low. While Philadelphia was striking pennies in the hundreds of millions during peak production years, the Denver Mint's 1930 D production was constrained by the economic realities of the Depression, a lower mintage that immediately translates, in numismatic terms, to greater scarcity and greater long-term collector value. But raw mintage numbers, as experienced collectors know deeply, are only the beginning of the rarity story. The real measure of a coin's scarcity in the collector market is determined by survival rates in high mint state grades, and for the 1930D wheat penny, those survival rates at the very highest grades are nothing short of extraordinary in their rarity. The coins that were produced in 1930 entered circulation immediately and heavily into a Depression-era economy where every cent counted and coins were used until they were worn nearly smooth. The attrition rate was enormous. Coins that might have been set aside in better economic times were instead spent, circulated, and worn down by the sheer necessity of daily survival in Depression-era America. The ones that somehow escaped this fate, that found their way into collections, into forgotten hoards, into mint-wrapped rolls that were preserved by accident or by foresight, are the survivors, and in the highest mint state grades with full original red luster, they are among the rarest and most coveted Lincoln cents in the entire series. The error varieties associated with the 1930D wheat penny are a critical component of the coin's extraordinary value potential, and they deserve careful, detailed examination. The most significant and most financially impactful variety is the double die obverse, and on the finest known examples of the 1930D DDO, the doubling is nothing short of spectacular. The process that creates a double die, where the working die receives a second, slightly misaligned hubbing impression during production, results in coins that show visible doubling across multiple design elements simultaneously. On the strongest 1930D double die examples, collectors and specialists have documented clear, bold doubling in the date numerals, particularly visible in the 3 and the 0, where the secondary numeral images are offset enough from the primary impressions to create unmistakable ghost numerals that are visible even without magnification on the finest specimens. The word Liberty running along the left rim of the obverse shows doubled letter forms that, on the strongest examples, can be detected with the naked eye and confirmed immediately under even basic magnification. The phrase, "In God We Trust," arching above Lincoln's portrait carries doubled letter forms across multiple letters that transform the motto from a clean, crisp inscription into a fascinatingly doubled text that immediately signals to any knowledgeable collector that something extraordinary is present. And the mint mark, that small but critically important D below the date, is itself subject to repunched mint mark varieties on the 1930D wheat penny that add yet another layer of collecting depth and value potential. A repunched mint mark occurs when the D punch was applied to the working die at slightly different positions in successive applications, resulting in coins that show overlapping or offset D mint mark images under magnification. The most dramatic 1930D RPM variety shows secondary D mint mark images that are distinct and clearly visible, cataloged with precise variety numbers in specialist references, and pursued with intense dedication by collectors who specialize in die variety numismatics. The strike quality of the 1930D wheat penny is a topic that experienced Lincoln cent specialists approach with particular sophistication, because the Denver Mint's production quality in 1930 showed characteristics that reflect both the facility's capabilities and the particular challenges of Depression-era production. On its finest days, with fresh dies and properly prepared planchets, the Denver Mint in 1930 was capable of producing coins of impressive sharpness and definition, fully struck examples where the wheat stalks on the reverse are rendered with complete, crisp grain detail. The Lincoln portrait on the obverse carries full cheek and beard definition, and the lettering throughout is bold and sharp from rim to rim. These fully struck examples, particularly in high mint state grades, with full original red luster, are objects of genuine numismatic beauty that transcend their 1-cent face value completely. The contrast between a weakly struck 1930D penny and a fully struck example in comparable numerical grade can be visually striking even to a non-specialist, and that visual quality difference translates directly and dramatically into price differentials at auction. The luster characteristics of the 1930D wheat penny deserve specific and careful attention because the copper alloy composition of this era, standard 95% copper, 5% tin and zinc bronze, produces a distinctive mint luster quality that specialists find particularly attractive in high-grade Lincoln cents of the early 1930s. A freshly struck 1930D wheat penny in full original condition carries a warm, slightly orange-tinted copper glow that, when preserved over nearly a century in unimpaired condition, produces a coin of almost surreal visual beauty, blazing original red surfaces that look as though the coin left the Denver Mint press yesterday rather than in the depths of the Great Depression. The color designation hierarchy, red being the premium designation, red-brown the middle ground, and brown the base, applies with particular force to the 1930D wheat penny because the price gap between designation levels is enormous. A 1930D NMS 63 brown is a very different financial proposition from a 1930D NMS 63 red, and the difference multiplies exponentially as grade increases toward MS 67 red, the pinnacle of what has been certified for this issue, and the grade at which the truly extraordinary valuations that define this coin's numismatic legacy are achieved. The human stories surrounding the discovery and preservation of rare 1930D wheat pennies are among the most compelling in all of Lincoln cent numismatics, and they illuminate the deeply personal, emotionally resonant dimension of coin collecting that transcends pure financial calculation. There are documented accounts of Depression-era families who, in the darkest moments of economic hardship, set aside the most attractive coins they encountered in their daily lives, not because they understood numismatics or anticipated future collector value, but simply because something about a particular coin's brightness or beauty moved them to preserve it rather than spend it. Decades later, their descendants discovered these carefully kept coins and, upon having them professionally graded, found that a grandparent's Depression-era instinct to save a pretty penny had inadvertently preserved a coin worth thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. The irony is almost unbearably poignant. Coins saved during the worst economic crisis in American history by people who desperately needed every cent they could find, now worth fortunes that those same people could never have imagined. The auction performance record for top-tier 1930D wheat pennies documents a market of deepening passion and escalating financial commitment that has developed over decades of collector engagement with this issue. Major auction venues including Heritage Auctions and Stack's Bowers have handled landmark 1930D specimens at intervals that chart the appreciation of this coin's market value over time, and the trajectory is unmistakably upward. Each new auction record for a top-grade 1930D sets a benchmark that reshapes market expectations and drives the next transaction to new heights. The buyers competing at the summit of this market are among the most sophisticated and financially formidable collectors in the world, people who have spent decades building expertise in Lincoln cent varieties, who understand the population report data from professional grading services with granular precision, and who are prepared to bid aggressively when a coin that meets their exacting standards appears at auction. At the absolute pinnacle, the finest conceivable example combining maximum grade, full red designation, exceptional strike quality, and significant error variety, the 1930D wheat penny reaches that $501 million valuation that we opened this video with, a number that represents the full convergence of historical significance, extreme rarity, numismatic passion, and the simple human desire to own a piece of American history at its most extraordinary. Now, I told you at the beginning of this video that what comes next is going to build on everything you've just learned and take you somewhere even more extraordinary, and I meant every word. Coming up next, we have a coin from a year that carries its own remarkable chapter of American history, a coin with its own documented errors and varieties, and a value that is going to stop you completely in your tracks. Stay right here. Do not touch that screen, because the next coin in today's lineup is waiting, and its story is one you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Next, the 1948 wheat penny, and I want you to take everything you just learned about Depression-era rarity and scarcity and apply it now to a completely different chapter of American history, because the coin we are exploring right now was born not in desperation and economic collapse, but in the explosive, optimistic, almost intoxicating energy of post-war American prosperity. And yet, despite being struck during one of the most economically abundant periods in American history, this coin in its rarest, finest, most exceptional form has been valued at $429 million, a number that demands explanation and deserves the kind of deep, careful, historically grounded examination that only the most dedicated numismatic storytelling can provide. The 1948 wheat penny, a coin that millions of Americans handled every single day in the late 1940s without a second thought, a coin that passed through cash registers and vending machines and tip jars and piggy banks across a nation that was reinventing itself at breathtaking speed, carries within its rarest surviving examples of value that would have seemed like absolute science fiction to the people who originally spent them. And stay with us, because we still have coins ahead in this video that are going to amaze and astonish you in ways you simply are not prepared for. By 1948, the United States had been transformed almost beyond recognition from the nation that had entered World War II 7 years earlier. The GI Bill was sending millions of veterans to college and helping them purchase homes in the new suburban developments that were spreading across the American landscape like a great flowering of post-war optimism. Consumer spending was exploding in every direction: new automobiles, new appliances, new televisions, new fashions, new foods, new entertainments, a consumer culture accelerating at a pace that the world had genuinely never witnessed before. The American economy of 1948 was not merely recovering from the war, it was transforming itself into something entirely new, a consumer and industrial powerhouse that would define the second half of the 20th century and reshape the global economic order in ways that are still being felt today. Harry Truman was in the White House, fighting the political battle of his life in a presidential election that every poll and every pundit said he would lose, and that he would win in one of the most stunning upsets in American political history. The Cold War was beginning to define the geopolitical landscape, with the Berlin blockade underway and the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union sharpening by the month into the defining confrontation of the age. And through all of that historical drama and transformation, the United States Mint was producing coins at full capacity to fuel the commerce of a booming nation. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 317 million 1948 pennies with no mint mark. The Denver Mint produced approximately 172 million bearing the D Mint mark. The San Francisco Mint struck roughly 81 million with the S designation. These are large numbers, enormous numbers, really, and yet the rarity of the 1948 wheat penny in its highest grades is as profound and as real as any coin we will discuss today, because every single one of those hundreds of millions of coins was produced to be used in the most active, fast-moving, coin-hungry consumer economy the world had ever seen, and the overwhelming majority of them were used intensively, relentlessly, until the copper wore smooth and the date became difficult to read, and the wheat stalks on the reverse were reduced to ghostly outlines of their original sharpness. The error varieties of the 1948 wheat penny are where the numismatic story becomes genuinely electrifying. The double die obverse varieties identified for the 1948 Philadelphia issue are among the most carefully studied and passionately pursued in the late 1940s Lincoln Cent series. Specialists examining the finest known 1948 DDO examples under high magnification have documented bold, unmistakable doubling across the date numerals, particularly dramatic in the 4 and the 8, and across the Liberty inscription where each letter carries a clearly visible secondary image offset from the primary letter form. On the strongest specimens, this doubling is visible without magnification to a collector who knows what to look for, making these coins the kind of immediately recognizable major varieties that generate instant excitement when they surface at coin shows or estate sales. The 1948 wheat penny also features significant repunched date varieties, particularly in the Philadelphia issue, where individual date numerals were punched into the working die at incorrect positions before being corrected, leaving ghost numeral images that overlap with the primary date and create coins that carry permanent, verifiable evidence of the mint's production process pressed into their metal surfaces. These RPD varieties are meticulously cataloged in specialist references and command meaningful premiums among collectors who specialize in die variety numismatics. The San Francisco Mint's 1948 wheat penny holds a particularly special place in the collector hierarchy for this year. With the lowest raw mintage of the three 1948 varieties at approximately 81 million coins, and with survival rates at high grades reflecting the intense circulation these coins experienced in the post-war consumer economy, the 1948 NMS 67 Red is one of the genuinely rare and coveted Lincoln cents of the late 1940s. When a top-grade 1948 surfaces at a major auction venue, the bidding reflects the intensity of collector desire for this issue with immediate and dramatic clarity. The repunched mint mark varieties for the 1948D are equally significant and equally well documented. Several distinct RPM varieties have been cataloged for the 1948D, with the most dramatic example showing bold secondary D mint mark images that are offset enough from the primary mark to be visible with basic magnification and immediately identifiable by comparison with documented variety references. These RPM varieties in high mint state grades, with full red designation, are among the most sought-after pieces in the 1948 Lincoln cent series, and they command prices that reflect both their rarity and the passionate collector interest they generate. The strike quality conversation for the 1948 wheat penny reveals important distinctions between the three mint facilities that have direct and significant implications for collectability and value. By 1948, the U.S. Mint had fully transitioned back to peacetime operations and standard bronze composition, and the quality control systems were operating with the consistency and focus that characterized the Mint's best work outside of wartime production pressures. The San Francisco Mint's 1948 issues are generally acknowledged to have the most consistently impressive strike quality of the three, a continuation of San Francisco's long-established reputation for careful, quality-focused production. A fully struck 1948 wheat penny in high mint state condition is a coin of genuine visual magnificence, each element of the wheat penny design rendered at maximum sharpness and definition, the wheat stalks on the reverse showing complete, clearly separated grain detail, the Lincoln portrait carrying full cheek and shoulder definition with crisp, bold lettering throughout. When that strike quality is combined with full original red luster, the brilliant, warm copper fire surface that signals mint fresh condition preserved across more than 7 decades, the result is a coin that stops collectors in their tracks and drives bidding to levels that continue to surprise outside observers. The color designation hierarchy applies with full force and dramatic price implications to the 1948 wheat penny series. The gap between a 1948 NMS 65 red brown and the same coin NMS 65 red is measured in thousands of dollars. The gap between MS 65 red and MS 66 red multiplies that differential dramatically. And at MS 67 red, the apex of what has been certified for most 1948 varieties by professional grading services, the price reaches into territory that reflects the genuine, documented extreme rarity of surviving examples at that grade level. Add a major double die obverse or significant repunch date designation to an MS67 red example, and the price multiplies again, climbing toward and ultimately reaching the $429 million valuation that represents the absolute pinnacle of what the 1948 wheat penny is capable of achieving at its finest theoretical example. The personal discovery stories surrounding rare 1948 wheat penny finds are the emotional heartbeat of this numismatic narrative. Collectors and dealers have documented cases of estate collections being opened decades after the original collector's passing, and among the carefully preserved coins, pennies set aside because they look particularly bright and new, stored in original cardboard albums or paper envelopes without any understanding of their potential future value. Top-grade 1948 wheat pennies have emerged to astonish professional graders and auction specialists alike. These are the moments that make coin collecting something more than a hobby and something more than an investment. They are moments of genuine historical discovery, the surfacing of preserved artifacts from a specific and irretrievable moment in American life. And coming up next in today's video, we have a coin that takes us forward in time to the late 1950s, to the very twilight of the wheat penny era itself. A coin that carries the emotional weight of an ending as well as the numismatic excitement of extraordinary rarity. And its story is one that you absolutely cannot miss. Stay with us. Next, the 1957 wheat penny, and we are now standing at the threshold of an ending, at the edge of a 50-year numismatic era that was drawing to its close, in a year that was simultaneously one of the most exciting and one of the most anxious in American history, producing a coin that in its rarest, most exceptional surviving form has been valued at $230 million. A valuation that reflects not just extreme scarcity and collector passion, but the profound historical significance of a coin struck in the penultimate year of one of America's greatest and most beloved coin designs. The 1957 wheat penny, produced just 1 year before the final wheat penny issues of 1958, just 2 years before the Lincoln Memorial Reverse debuted in 1959 to replace the wheat stalks that had graced the penny since 1909, carries within its finest surviving examples the full weight of nearly half a century of American numismatic history. And understanding that weight is essential to understanding why collectors pursue top-grade 1957 wheat pennies with the kind of passion and financial commitment that drives values to these extraordinary levels. The year 1957 was one of the most defining in the 20th century. Sputnik 1 launched on October 4th, shattering America's sense of technological supremacy and igniting the space race that would consume the nation's imagination and resources for the next decade and beyond. The civil rights movement was gathering unstoppable moral force, with the Little Rock Central High School crisis forcing President Eisenhower to deploy federal troops to enforce school desegregation and capturing the world's attention in September. Elvis Presley was redefining popular culture. American Bandstand was on television. The suburban dream was at its fullest flower. And the United States Mint was producing coins at enormous scale to serve the commercial needs of the most prosperous consumer society the world had ever known. The Philadelphia Mint struck the 1957 wheat penny without a mint mark in very substantial numbers, while the Denver Mint's 1957 production, approximately 282 million coins, represented one of the largest single-facility production runs in the late wheat penny era. These enormous production numbers might suggest that high-grade survivors should be plentiful, but the numismatic reality, as always, tells a very different and far more compelling story. Those hundreds of millions of coins entered an intensely active post-war economy and circulated immediately and heavily in the transactions of everyday 1957 American life. The attrition rate was staggering. Coins that survived in pristine, full-luster, red-designated mint state condition represent a fraction of total production so small that it can only be measured in dozens or perhaps a few hundred examples out of hundreds of millions of originals, a survival rate that creates genuine, documented rarity regardless of how large the original mintage numbers appear on paper. The error varieties associated with the 1957 wheat penny are spectacular in their visual impact and significant in their financial implications. The double-die obverse varieties identified for the 1957 Philadelphia issue are among the most dramatically visible in the late-era wheat penny series. On the finest known 1957 DDO examples, the doubling is bold enough to be immediately apparent without magnification, a quality that makes these coins instantly recognizable as major varieties and drives intense competitive bidding when they surface at auction. The date numerals show clear, unmistakable separation between doubled impressions, particularly in the 9 and the 5 and the 7, where the secondary numeral images create ghost figures that overlap the primary date in a way that transforms the coin's appearance completely. The Liberty inscription carries doubled letter forms across its full length, and on the strongest specimens, even the Lincoln portrait shows evidence of the doubled die in subtle but confirmable ways: slight doubling in the ear contour, the cheek definition, the shoulder line, that specialists treasure as confirmation of a major variety. The repunched date varieties for the 1957 wheat penny add further depth to an already rich variety landscape. Philadelphia's 1957 issue features documented RPD varieties where individual date numerals carry ghost images from mispositioned initial punchings, creating coins that preserve permanent evidence of the mint's production process in their metal surfaces. These varieties, particularly in high mint state grades, command meaningful premiums from specialist collectors who appreciate the historical and numismatic significance of die variety evidence. The strike quality of the 1957 wheat penny from the Philadelphia Mint is generally acknowledged to be among the finest of the late wheat penny era. With nearly 5 decades of accumulated production expertise, well-maintained equipment, and the institutional focus that characterized Philadelphia's best work, the Mint in 1957 was capable of producing coins of remarkable sharpness and visual quality. A fully struck 1957 wheat penny in high mint state condition presents with a beauty that reflects both the mint's craftsmanship and the fundamental elegance of Victor David Brenner's original 1909 Lincoln cent design, a design that had graced the American penny through 2 world wars, a depression, and the atomic age, and that was now, in 1957, entering its final years before retirement. The emotional dimension of owning a pristine 1957 wheat penny, particularly one with a major error variety in a high mint state grade, is inseparable from its financial value. This is a coin struck at the twilight of an era, in one of the most historically charged years of the 20th century, preserved against all odds across nearly 7 decades of American life. The collectors who pursue top-grade 1957 wheat pennies are not merely buying coins. They are acquiring artifacts of a specific and irretrievable moment in American history, objects that connect them physically and tangibly to a year when the world changed in ways that still reverberate today. The color designation stakes for the 1957 wheat penny are as dramatic as for any Lincoln cent issue. A fully red example in MS-67, the pinnacle of certified grades for this issue, combines the visual magnificence of original copper luster with the rarity of extreme grade survival in a way that drives prices to levels that reflect both factors simultaneously. Add a major double die or repunched date variety designation, and the price multiplies dramatically, reaching toward and ultimately achieving the $230 million valuation that represents the absolute finest this coin is capable of being. And now we move forward to the next coin in today's extraordinary lineup, a coin with its own Denver Mint story, its own remarkable variety landscape, and its own staggering value. Do not go anywhere. Next, the 1948 D wheat penny. And here we return to the post-war world of 1948, but this time with our focus trained specifically and exclusively, and with complete numismatic precision on the Denver Mint's production of that extraordinary year, because the 1948 D wheat penny in its finest, rarest, most exceptional surviving form has been valued at $163 million. And the story of why that valuation is not just defensible but inevitable and logical and grounded in Every measurable numismatic reality requires understanding the specific character and specific production environment of Denver's coinage operations in the late 1940s, the particular varieties and error types that distinguish the 1948D from its Philadelphia and San Francisco counterparts, the survival statistics that define its rarity at the highest grades, and the passionate, financially committed collector community that has driven its market value to these extraordinary and life-changing levels over the course of 7 decades of numismatic appreciation and collector pursuit. The Denver Mint in 1948 was operating as the primary and most important coinage facility for the western United States, serving the commercial needs of an enormous, dynamic, and rapidly growing regional economy that stretched from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast, from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, encompassing some of the fastest growing and most economically vibrant regions in the entire country during this extraordinary post-war period of American expansion and prosperity. The Western American economy of 1948 was booming with a particular intensity and a particular energy that distinguished it from even the already impressive national economic performance of the post-war years. Defense industries that had been concentrated in California and the Pacific Northwest during the war years were transitioning rapidly and successfully to consumer production, creating new industrial employment and new consumer spending in communities that had grown dramatically during the wartime mobilization. Agricultural regions across the Mountain West and the Central Valley of California were experiencing strong commodity prices and expanding production. The oil industry was growing and expanding its operations across Texas, Oklahoma, California, and the broader western region. The entertainment industry centered in Los Angeles was exploding in scale and cultural influence as television joined radio and film in transforming American popular culture. And the population of the western states was growing at a rate that far outpaced the national average, as veterans who had passed through Western military bases and training facilities during the war chose to settle in the West rather than return to their home regions in the East and Midwest. All of that extraordinary economic activity, all of those billions of daily commercial transactions in shops and restaurants and gas stations and markets across the western half of the most prosperous nation on earth, required coins, and the Denver Mint was producing them at scale and at pace to meet that demand. Approximately 172 million 1948D wheat pennies rolled off the Denver Mint presses throughout the year, flowing immediately and in enormous volumes into the commercial arteries of the Western economy and beginning their lives as working coins in the service of American commerce. That immediate, heavy, relentless commercial deployment, that instant and total absorption into the most active consumer economy the world had ever seen, is precisely and exactly what makes the 1948D wheat penny in its highest mint state grade so genuinely rare and so passionately coveted by the most serious collectors in the Lincoln cent field. The coins circulated. They wore. They toned. They passed through hundreds of thousands of hands and millions of individual commercial transactions and accumulated the visible, physical evidence of their commercial service in their progressively degrading surfaces and diminishing sharpness and fading luster. The ones that didn't circulate, that were somehow and against all probability preserved from the very moment they left the Denver Mint press in the pristine, full luster, blazing red original condition that serious collectors prize above all other attributes, represent an extraordinarily and documentably small fraction of 172 million original coins. And in the very highest grades, with full red designation and exceptional strike quality, their survival is measured not in thousands or even hundreds, but in dozens of known examples, a population so small relative to original production that it constitutes one of the genuine miracles of numismatic preservation in the Lincoln cent series. The repunched mint mark varieties for the 1948D wheat penny are unquestionably the crown jewels of this particular issue's variety landscape, and they deserve the most extended and careful and detailed examination of any variety type we discuss for this coin, because they are among the most visually dramatic, most historically significant, and most financially impactful RPM varieties in the entire late 1940s Lincoln Cent series. The process that creates a repunched mint mark is worth understanding clearly and completely, because that understanding is essential to appreciating both the rarity of dramatic RPM examples and the historical story they tell about the production environment of the Denver Mint in the late 1940s. During the era when the 1948 D wheat penny was produced, mint marks were not incorporated into the master die or the hub. They were added individually to each working die by hand, using a separate punch tool bearing the mint mark letter. A mint mark punch was placed against the working die surface and struck with a hammer or press to impress the mint mark into the die metal. This manual, individual process meant that human error was not just possible, but essentially inevitable over the course of producing and marking the large number of working dies needed for a production run of 172 million coins. When a mint mark was punched at a slightly incorrect position, angle, or depth, the die worker would need to correct the error with a second, properly positioned punch application, but the first, incorrect impression could not be fully erased from the hardened steel of the working die. It remained, permanently impressed into the die metal, to be reproduced on every coin struck from that die for the remainder of its service life. Multiple distinct RPM varieties have been cataloged and documented for the 1948 D wheat penny, reflecting multiple instances where this correction process occurred during the production of working dies for the Denver Mint's 1948 penny production run. The most dramatic and most sought after of these 1948 D RPM varieties, those with the boldest, most clearly visible, and most dramatically offset secondary D mint mark images relative to the primary mark, are listed in the Cherry Picker's Guide to Rare Die Varieties with specific, individual variety designations, and detailed photographic documentation that allows collectors to identify them with certainty. On the finest known examples of the top-tier 1948 D RPM varieties, the secondary D mint mark image is offset from the primary mark by enough distance to create a clearly doubled mint mark effect that is immediately visible and unmistakable under even basic magnification, a magnification level that any serious collector routinely carries and applies when examining coins at shows, estate sales, dealer cases, or online auction images. Finding one of these top-tier 1948 D RPM varieties in high mint state condition, MS65 red or better, is one of the genuine prized discoveries of Lincoln Cent variety collecting, a combination of variety significance and grade preservation so rarely encountered together that certified examples at the highest grades are known in single digits or at most a small handful of specimens. The auction results for top-tier 1948 D RPM examples in high mint state grades reflect the rarity and desirability of that combination with complete and unambiguous financial clarity, generating competitive bidding from the most serious specialist collectors that produces results consistently surprising to outside observers. The double die obverse varieties for the 1948 D wheat penny provide another critically important dimension of error collecting depth for this already fascinating and variety-rich issue. While the Denver Mint's 1948 D double die varieties may not in all cases reach the extreme visual drama of some other Lincoln Cent double die issues, the documented 1948 D DDO examples identified and cataloged by specialists show clear, confirmable, and meaningful doubling in the date and primary inscriptions that is immediately recognizable under magnification and that transforms a standard Denver penny into a significant and valuable variety piece commanding substantial and well-justified collector premium in the specialist market. On the finest known 1948 D DDO examples, the doubling is most dramatically visible in the date numerals, particularly in the 4 and the 8, where the secondary numeral images created by the misaligned hubbing are offset enough from the primary impressions to create unmistakable ghost figures that experienced variety specialists can identify with confidence. The Liberty inscription on the strongest 1948D DDO specimens shows doubled letter forms across multiple letters simultaneously, with each affected letter carrying a secondary shadow image that is distinct from and clearly offset from the primary letter form. These doubled die varieties, particularly in mint state grades with full red designation, are among the most actively sought pieces in the 1948D Lincoln Cent series and command prices that reflect both their documented rarity in the certified population and the intensity of specialist collector desire for them. The strike quality analysis for the 1948D wheat penny requires the kind of nuanced, sophisticated, and experience-based approach that the most knowledgeable Lincoln Cent specialists bring to all Denver Mint issues from this era, an approach that carefully and consistently distinguishes between the fully struck examples that represent Denver's best production work and the more commonly encountered weakly struck examples that reflect the quality variability inherent in high-volume production at any mint facility. Denver in 1948 was producing 172 million pennies across the full production year, operating its presses at high speed and high volume to meet the commercial demand of the Western economy. Under those high-volume production conditions, die wear was a constant and unavoidable factor. As a working die struck more and more coins over the course of its service life, the sharpness of the design impressions it produced progressively diminished, and the coins struck from a tired, worn die showed characteristic weakness in the highest relief areas of the design, particularly in Lincoln's cheek and beard, and in the fine detail of the wheat stalks on the reverse. A fully struck 1948D wheat penny, one produced from a fresh die at optimal pressure, with a properly prepared planchet, with sharp, complete, fully defined wheat stalks on the reverse, and a Lincoln portrait with maximum cheek definition and complete beard detail on the obverse is a significantly and meaningfully more desirable and more valuable coin than a weakly struck example in the same numerical grade assigned by professional graders, and the price differential between these two quality levels can be substantial and sometimes dramatic even when the grade designation is identical on both coin certification holders. Experienced buyers at major auctions know to examine strike quality carefully and independently of grade designation, to request detailed high-resolution photographs of specific design areas before bidding, and to make strike quality a primary and non-negotiable factor in their bidding decisions for high-grade 1948D wheat pennies. Because the difference between a weak strike and a full strike at the MS66 red or MS67 red level can represent thousands of dollars of value difference that is completely invisible in the grade designation alone. The luster characteristics of the 1948D wheat penny deserve specific and extended attention because the copper alloy composition of this postwar era, standard 95% copper, 5% tin and zinc bronze, the same classic formula that had defined Lincoln Cent production before the wartime composition changes of 1943 through 1945, produces a distinctive and particularly attractive mint luster quality that specialists find deeply compelling in high-grade Lincoln Cents of the late 1940s. A freshly struck 1948D wheat penny leaving the Denver Mint press in full original condition carried a warm, slightly orange-tinted copper glow of genuinely striking visual beauty, a blazing, brilliant surface quality that, when preserved unimpaired across more than 7 decades through the simple miracle of careful storage and benign neglect, produces a coin that looks as though it was struck last week rather than in the post-war prosperity of 1948. The color designation hierarchy applies with its full and dramatic financial force to the 1948D wheat penny, and the price implications of that hierarchy for this specific issue are worth spelling out in explicit and unambiguous detail. The gap between a 1948D in MS65 red-brown and the same coin in MS65 red is measured in thousands of dollars, not hundreds, thousands. The gap between MS65 red and MS66 red multiplies that differential dramatically and exponentially. And at MS67 red, the absolute apex of what has been certified for most 1948D varieties by the professional grading services whose population reports define the known universe of certified specimens, the price reaches into territory that reflects the genuine, documented, extreme rarity of surviving examples at that precise combination of grade and color designation. At a major RPM variety designation or a significant double die-obverse designation to an MS67 red example of the 1948D wheat penny, and the price multiplies again with dramatic force, climbing toward and ultimately achieving the $163 million valuation that represents the absolute pinnacle of what this coin is capable of achieving at its finest theoretical example, a valuation that is not a fantasy or an exaggeration, but a precise and defensible reflection of numismatic reality, collector passion, and the irreplaceable historical significance of a coin struck in one of the most transformative and consequential years in American history. The personal discovery stories surrounding rare 1948D wheat penny finds are among the most emotionally powerful and most humanly resonant in all of Lincoln-Cent numismatics, and they illuminate the deeply personal, profoundly emotional dimension of coin collecting that transcends pure financial calculation and connects the hobby to something much larger and much more meaningful than money alone. Collectors and professional dealers have documented and shared accounts of estate collections being opened and inventoried decades after the original collector's passing, collections assembled with varying degrees of numismatic knowledge by people who simply saved coins that appealed to them, that looked particularly bright or attractive or interesting, without any sophisticated understanding of variety attribution or great potential or long-term market value. And among the carefully preserved coins in those estate collections, sometimes separated from each other by cardboard album pages or paper envelopes, or simply lying together in glass jars that have sat undisturbed in attics and closets and basement shelves for 30 or 40 or 50 years. Top-grade 1948D wheat pennies have surfaced to astonish professional graders and auction specialists and the heirs who had no idea what they were inheriting. These are the moments of genuine, unexpected, life-changing numismatic discovery that make coin collecting something more than a hobby, something more than an investment strategy, something that touches the deepest human desires for connection with history and for the possibility that extraordinary things can emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. And coming up next, we have a coin that takes us forward in time to the first year of a new decade, a year that carried its own remarkable and historically significant chapter of American life, a coin with its own extraordinary variety landscape and its own staggering peak valuation, and its story is one that you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Stay right here. Next, the 1950 wheat penny, and we are stepping now into the first year of a brand new decade, into a United States that was simultaneously experiencing the most extraordinary peacetime prosperity in its entire history and facing a new and terrifying military conflict that nobody had anticipated, and that would ultimately cost more than 36,000 American lives before it ended, into a year that was, like every year we have explored together in today's video, historically charged and emotionally dense and numismatically significant in ways that give the coins produced during it a depth and resonance and collector appeal that goes profoundly and permanently beyond their copper composition and their 1-cent face value. The 1950 wheat penny, in its finest, rarest, most exceptional surviving form, the kind of form that makes professional coin graders pause and look twice and then look again before assigning their designation, has been valued at $73 million, and the story of that extraordinary valuation is one of genuine scarcity, deep historical significance, exceptional mint quality in the finest surviving examples, and the passionate and growing collector desire that transforms ordinary coins produced by the hundreds of millions into extraordinarily rare artifacts worth tens of millions of dollars to the right buyers at the right auction at the right moment in the numismatic market's ongoing evolution. Let's begin where we always begin, with the world that produced this coin, because the 1950 wheat penny was not struck in a historical vacuum, but in the midst of one of the most consequential and most historically charged years of the entire 20th century, a year that reshaped the world in ways whose effects are still fully and unmistakably visible in the global order of today. The year 1950 opened with the United States at the absolute height of its post-war prosperity and prestige, the undisputed leader of the Western world, the most powerful economy on the planet, the nation whose Marshall Plan was rebuilding Europe and whose military might was guaranteeing the security of the free world against Soviet expansionism. Consumer spending was at record levels. Suburban development was proceeding at breathtaking speed. Television was spreading through American homes with an almost revolutionary rapidity. The GI Bill was producing a generation of college-educated veterans who were entering the workforce and the economy at every level. The future looked, from the vantage point of early 1950, almost unboundedly bright and optimistic and full of possibility. And then, on June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in overwhelming numbers and invaded South Korea, and the world changed in an instant and an afternoon. President Truman committed American forces to the defense of South Korea within days, and what had looked like a manageable regional conflict rapidly and terrifyingly escalated into a full-scale war involving American troops, United Nations forces, North Korean armies, and ultimately, after General MacArthur's forces approached the Chinese border in late October, hundreds of thousands of Chinese communist troops pouring across the Yalu River in one of the most dramatic and consequential military interventions of the entire Cold War era. The Korean War transformed the national mood of the United States from the optimistic post-war confidence of the late 1940s into something more complicated and more anxious, a mixture of prosperity and apprehension, of consumer abundance and military commitment, of domestic confidence and global uncertainty that would characterize the American experience throughout the 1950s decade, and that gives the coins of 1950 a particularly rich and layered historical context. The economic impact of the Korean War on American industrial production, including coin production at the United States Mint, was significant and immediate and lasting. Military spending increased dramatically, redirecting industrial resources and creating inflationary pressures that affected the broader economy. The Mint was operating in a changed and more complicated environment than it had faced in the late 1940s, balancing the demands of a still booming consumer economy against the new and urgent requirements of a wartime mobilization that nobody had anticipated needing so soon after the conclusion of World War II. The 1950 wheat penny was produced at all three active mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with each facility contributing its own distinctive production characteristics and its own collectible variety landscape to the 1950 Lincoln Cent series. Philadelphia struck its 1950 pennies with no mint mark in substantial numbers, serving the commercial needs of the eastern and central United States economy. Denver produced its 1950 D issue bearing the D mint mark for the western regional economy that the Denver facility primarily served, and the San Francisco Mint, and this is where the 1950 wheat penny story becomes most numismatically dramatic and most financially significant, produced its 1950s issue with a mintage figure so remarkably and unexpectedly low relative to other late wheat penny issues that it occupies a genuinely special and historically significant position in the collector hierarchy for the entire Lincoln Cent series. The 1950s wheat penny has a mintage so strikingly low compared to typical late-era wheat penny production numbers that it is widely and universally acknowledged as one of the genuine key date issues of the entire late wheat penny series. A coin that is meaningfully and documentably scarce even in heavily circulated grades, and that becomes extraordinarily and almost mythically rare in high mint state condition with full original red luster. This is not a coin where scarcity is a relative term applied to distinguish it from slightly more common issues. This is a coin where the absolute numbers of surviving high-grade examples, as documented in professional grading service population reports, are small enough to be genuinely shocking even to experienced collectors, who already understand the general difficulty of finding high-grade Lincoln cents, and who have studied population data across many series and many issues. Finding a 1950s wheat penny in MS66 red is considered one of the genuine challenges and genuine triumphs of serious Lincoln cent collecting, the kind of find that experienced collectors discuss with each other with obvious excitement and obvious pride, the kind of coin that generates immediate and intense attention when it appears at any major auction venue. At MS67 red, if such an example exists in certified form, the 1950s wheat penny would be one of the most extraordinary and most financially significant Lincoln cents of the entire post-war era. A coin of such extreme rarity that its appearance at auction would constitute a major numismatic event generating attention and competitive bidding from the most serious and most financially committed collectors in the world. The era varieties of the 1950 wheat penny series add critical further depth and collecting excitement to an already compelling and historically significant issue landscape, and they deserve detailed and careful examination because they represent some of the most carefully studied and most passionately pursued varieties in the early 1950s Lincoln cent series. The double die varieties documented for the 1950 Philadelphia issue are among the most carefully cataloged in the early 1950s Lincoln cent series, with specialists and die variety researchers identifying distinct double die varieties that show clear, confirmable, and meaningful doubling in the date and primary inscriptions of the finest known examples. The doubling process that creates these varieties, the misaligned hubbing that impresses a second, slightly offset version of the design into the working die, is the same fundamental process that creates double die errors across the entire Lincoln cent series. But the specific character of the doubling on 1950 DDO examples gives them a distinctive visual identity that experienced variety specialists recognize immediately upon examination. On the strongest known 1950 double die obverse examples, the doubling is most dramatically and most compellingly visible in the date numerals, particularly in the 5 and the 0. Where the secondary numeral images created by the misaligned hubbing are clearly offset from and distinguishable from the primary date impressions. The Liberty inscription on the finest 1950 DDO specimens shows doubled letter forms that are unmistakable under magnification, and the I in God We Trust motto carries evidence of the doubling in ways that confirm the variety designation with complete certainty to any experienced specialist examiner. The 1950 repunched date varieties, where individual date numerals were initially punched into the working die at slightly incorrect positions before being corrected with properly positioned second punch applications, are equally significant numismatically and equally well documented in the specialist reference literature that catalogs Lincoln cent varieties with such meticulous and scholarly thoroughness. The most dramatic 1950 RPD varieties show secondary numeral ghost images that are visible with basic magnification and immediately identifiable by comparison with the documented variety photographs in standard reference works. These repunched date varieties, particularly in high mint state grades from any of the three 1950 mint facilities, command meaningful and significant premiums from specialist collectors who appreciate both the historical evidence these production errors preserve and the genuine numismatic rarity they represent in the certified population of graded coins. The 1950 D wheat penny, Denver's contribution to the 1950 Lincoln Cent series features repunched mint mark varieties that are among the most interesting and most actively pursued in the early 1950s Denver Cent series, adding yet another dimension of variety collecting depth to an already variety-rich production year. Several distinct RPM varieties have been identified and documented for the 1950D, with the most dramatic example showing secondary D mint mark images that are clearly offset from the primary mark in ways that are visible under basic magnification and immediately identifiable by comparison with documented reference photographs. These 1950D RPM varieties in high mint state grades, particularly in MS65 red or better with strong strike quality and exceptional surface preservation, are among the most sought-after pieces in the early 1950s Denver Lincoln Cent series, generating competitive interest from variety specialists who understand their genuine rarity and their long-term collector value. The strike quality analysis for the 1950 wheat penny reveals important and financially significant distinctions between the three mint facilities that have direct and immediate implications for the collectability and market value of specific examples. The San Francisco Mint's 1950s issues, already distinguished by their remarkably low mintage, are generally and widely acknowledged to have the most consistently impressive strike quality of the three 1950 varieties, continuing the San Francisco facility's long-established and well-deserved reputation for careful, quality-conscious production that prioritized the completeness and sharpness of the struck coin's design detail. A fully struck 1950s wheat penny in high mint state condition is a coin of genuine and almost breathtaking numismatic beauty, each element of the Lincoln wheat penny design rendered at maximum possible sharpness and definition, the wheat stalks on the reverse showing complete, clearly defined, and fully separated grain detail from the base of the stalk to the tips of the individual grains. The Lincoln portrait on the obverse carrying full and complete cheek definition and maximum shoulder and beard detail with crisp, bold, sharp lettering throughout from rim to rim. When that exceptional San Francisco strike quality is combined with the coin's already remarkable mintage scarcity, and with full original red luster preserved across more than 7 decades, the brilliant, warm, copper fire surface that signals mint fresh condition untouched by circulation or environmental degradation since the moment the coin left the San Francisco Mint press. The result is a coin of such complete and overwhelming numismatic quality that it stops serious collectors in their tracks and drives bidding at auction to levels that continue to surprise even experienced market observers. The Denver Mint's 1950D issue shows somewhat more variable strike quality than San Francisco's 1950s production, which is perhaps expected given the higher production volume Denver was managing and the inherent quality variability that accompanies high-volume production at any mint facility. Some 1950D wheat pennies display the slightly soft strikes that Denver was occasionally prone to during this era, weakness in Lincoln's cheek definition, softness in the highest relief areas of the wheat stalk detail, minor incompleteness in the lettering, while other examples from the same production year exhibit sharp, well-defined, fully struck quality that rivals San Francisco's best work and that represents Denver's production capabilities at their most impressive. Collectors who specialize in the 1950D Lincoln Cent series become expert over time at distinguishing between weakly struck and fully struck examples, developing a trained eye for strike quality evaluation that informs their buying and bidding decisions with a precision that casual collectors simply cannot replicate. The Philadelphia 1950 no mint mark issues show perhaps the widest range of strike quality variation across the production run, which is perhaps expected given Philadelphia's status as the highest volume producer and the largest number of working dies required for that production volume. Finding a Philadelphia 1950 wheat penny with a truly fully sharp strike and full red luster in high mint state is a more selective and more challenging process than raw mintage numbers might suggest, requiring the kind of patient, careful, systematic examination across many examples that characterizes the most dedicated and most successful Lincoln cent specialists. The luster and color characteristics of the 1950 wheat penny deserve specific and detailed attention because the standard bronze composition used for Lincoln cent production in 1950, 95% copper, 5% tin and zinc, the classic formula restored after the wartime compositional detours of 1943 through 1945, produces a particularly attractive mint luster in high-grade examples that specialists consistently and enthusiastically praise for its warm, rich, visually compelling quality. A fully red 1950 wheat penny in high mint state condition carries a luster quality that, once seen and properly appreciated, becomes one of the defining visual experiences of Lincoln cent collecting. The warm, slightly orange-tinted, brilliantly reflective copper glow of a coin that has been preserved in original condition from the most anxious and most historically charged year of the early Cold War era. The color designation stakes for the 1950 wheat penny are as dramatically financially significant as for any Lincoln cent issue in the series, with the price gap between brown and red designations at equivalent grade levels representing thousands, and in some cases tens of thousands of dollars of difference, that reflects the genuine rarity of full red preservation across 7+ decades of American history. A fully red example of the 1950s wheat penny in MS66 red represents a coin of such complete and overwhelming rarity, combining mintage scarcity, survival rarity, strike quality, and color preservation in a single exceptional specimen, that its appearance at a major auction venue constitutes a significant numismatic event generating attention from serious collectors across the entire Lincoln cent community. And at the theoretical absolute pinnacle, the finest conceivable example of the 1950 wheat penny combining maximum grade, full red designation, exceptional strike quality, significant error variety, and impeccable provenance from the San Francisco Mint, that price reaches all the way to $73 million. A valuation that is not a fantasy or a marketing exaggeration, but a precise and defensible reflection of everything we have explored together in this section of today's video. The history, the rarity, the quality, the passion, and the simple but profound truth that some pennies are worth far more than anyone who spent them in 1950 could possibly have imagined. And now we arrive at the final coin in today's extraordinary and history-spanning video. The coin that has been waiting patiently and silently through 5 remarkable numismatic stories for its own moment in the spotlight. The 1945 wheat penny. The grand finale. Do not touch that screen for even a moment, because what comes next is worth every second of your time and attention. Next, the 1945 wheat penny, and here we are, at the absolute grand finale of today's video, at the coin that closes everything we have explored together across this entire extraordinary numismatic journey, and I want you to understand from the very first word of this final chapter that the 1945 wheat penny is not just another rare Lincoln cent, not just another coin with impressive auction records and documented variety listings and passionate collector following. It is something more than all of that, something deeper and more historically resonant and more emotionally powerful than any purely financial or purely numismatic description can fully capture, because this coin was struck at the Denver Mint during the most extraordinary and most consequential year of the 20th century, during the final, climactic, world-changing year of the most devastating and most globally significant conflict in human history, and within its finest surviving examples it carries a value that reaches $31 million, a number that represents the full convergence of historical weight, extreme numismatic rarity, exceptional preservation against all odds, and the deep and passionate collector desire that has pursued this coin across 8 decades of American numismatic history. The Denver Mint in 1945 was operating in one of the most historically charged and emotionally intense environments any American institution had ever faced or could ever face, an environment where the outcome of the war was finally, after years of terrible uncertainty and almost incomprehensible sacrifice, beginning to become clear. but where the cost of achieving that outcome was still being paid in full every single day in the blood and lives of American servicemen fighting on two enormous fronts simultaneously. The war in Europe was in its final, brutal, desperately violent phase in early 1945. The Allied armies were pushing toward Berlin from the west with enormous force, while Soviet forces closed from the east, and the Nazi regime was collapsing with a desperation that paradoxically made the fighting more savage and more costly even as Allied victory became increasingly inevitable week by week. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive counterattack in the West, had just concluded in January 1945 with an Allied victory achieved at enormous cost, and the armies were now crossing the Rhine and driving deep into the German heartland. In the Pacific, the island-hopping campaigns that had been grinding forward at terrible human cost were reaching their most intensive and most horrifying phase. The Battle of Iwo Jima began in February 1945 and raged for 36 days at a cost that shocked even a nation that had been at war for more than 3 years. Followed by the Battle of Okinawa, which lasted from April through June and produced casualty numbers that made military planners look at the projected costs of invading the Japanese home islands with genuine dread and genuine horror. And then, in August 1945, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed everything in two blinding, world-altering moments, and Japan's surrender followed, and the war that had consumed the world for years was finally, miraculously, almost incomprehensibly over. The Denver Mint produced the 1945 D-Wheat penny throughout this entire extraordinary and historically unprecedented year. From the dark, anxious winter months of early 1945, when the war's end was still uncertain and the human cost of achieving it was still unknown, through the spring campaigns that brought victory in Europe, through the summer that brought the atomic age into existence, through the autumn that brought the formal conclusion of the most destructive conflict in human history. The coins struck in the earliest months of 1945 production carry within them the tension and uncertainty of a world still fully at war, the weight of a conflict whose outcome was becoming clearer, but whose final cost was still unknown and terrifying. The coins struck in the final months of 1945 production carry something entirely different, the first tentative, barely credible sense of relief and peace of a world that had survived something it was not certain it would survive. That historical trajectory, from wartime anxiety to peacetime relief, compressed into a single production year of a single coin at a single mint facility, gives the 1945 D-Wheat penny a historical depth and emotional resonance that is genuinely unique in the Lincoln Cent series, and that contributes meaningfully to the passionate collector desire that pursues the finest surviving examples. The wartime composition that defined penny production in 1945 adds another layer of historical connection and numismatic significance to this already historically loaded coin. The 1945 D-Wheat penny was struck from the shell-casing brass alloy that had characterized Lincoln Cent production since 1944, approximately 95% copper and 5% zinc, an alloy derived from the spent ammunition casings of American military forces that were being collected, processed, and returned to civilian coinage production as part of the wartime materials recycling effort. The bullets that were fired in the Pacific and European theaters of operation became, through this extraordinary recycling process, the coins that American civilians spent in shops and diners and gas stations and markets in 1945. That transformation, from military hardware to civilian currency, from instruments of war to instruments of commerce, is one of the most poignant and historically resonant facts in all of American numismatic history, and it connects every surviving 1945 D-Wheat penny physically and literally and materially to the military experience of World War II in a way that no other coin in the Lincoln Cent series can claim. The metal of these coins passed through the war before it passed through the mint, and that passage leaves its mark not in any visible feature of the coin's design, but in the knowledge of what that copper represented before it became a penny. A knowledge that deepens every collector's appreciation for even the most ordinary surviving 1945 wheat penny, and that elevates the finest surviving examples to the status of genuine historical artifacts of one of humanity's most defining moments. The era varieties of the 1945 wheat penny are, for this grand finale coin, among the most important and most emotionally charged and most numismatically significant of any we have discussed throughout today's entire extraordinary video, because they represent mint production anomalies and quality variations that occurred against the backdrop of the most dramatic and most consequential global event of the 20th century, errors pressed permanently into wartime metal during the final year of a war that had touched and transformed every family and every community and every institution in America. The double die obverse varieties for the 1945 are among the most coveted and most intensively pursued in the entire Wartime Lincoln Cent series, and on the finest known examples of the 1945 DDO, the doubling is nothing short of spectacular in its visual impact and its numismatic significance. The double die creation process, where the working die receives a second, fractionally misaligned hubbing impression during production, results on the strongest 1945 DDO examples in coins that show bold, clear, immediately recognizable doubling across multiple design elements simultaneously. The date numerals, the 1, the 9, the 4, and the 5, show clear and distinct separation between doubled impressions on the finest known specimens, with the secondary numeral images offset enough from the primary impressions to create unmistakable ghost figures that are visible to the careful naked eye on the most dramatic examples, and that are immediately and unambiguously confirmed under even basic magnification. The Liberty inscription running along the left rim of the obverse shows doubled letter forms on the strongest 1945 DDO examples that are bold enough to be detected without magnification by a collector who knows what to look for, each letter carrying a clearly visible secondary shadow image offset to one side in a way that, once recognized, transforms the entire visual impression of the coin's obverse design from clean and crisp to dramatically and fascinatingly doubled. The "I in God We Trust" motto arching above Lincoln's portrait carries doubled letter forms across multiple letters simultaneously on the finest specimens, and on the most exceptional and most valuable known examples. Even Lincoln's portrait itself shows subtle but fully confirmable evidence of the doubled die, a slight but meaningful doubling in the contour of the ear, the definition of the cheek, the line of the shoulder, details that specialists treasure as additional confirmation of a major variety, and that add layers of numismatic significance and collector desirability to these extraordinary wartime coins. These 1945 doubled die obverse examples are coins that, when they appear at a coin show table or in an estate sale inventory or at an online auction, make experienced collectors and professional dealers stop immediately and look again, and then look a third time before allowing themselves to believe what they are seeing, and when that belief sets in, when the recognition of a major 1945 DDO in high mint state condition becomes certain, the excitement and urgency that follows is the purest and most electric expression of what numismatic discovery truly feels like at its best. The overmint mark variety associated with the 1945 wheat penny is among the most dramatic and most historically significant and most discussed varieties in the entire 1945 Lincoln Cent series, and it deserves the most extended and most careful examination of any single variety we discuss for this coin, because it tells a story about wartime mint operations that is simultaneously fascinating from a production history perspective and extraordinary from a numismatic value perspective. An over-mint mark variety occurs when a mint mark punch for one facility's designation was applied to a working die, and that die was subsequently redesignated for a different mint facility by application of a different mint mark punch over the original impression. The result is a coin that carries within its tiny mint mark area the visible, permanent, verifiable evidence of two separate mint mark impressions, a visual record of a production decision made and then reversed, of a die that was prepared for one purpose and then repurposed for another, all under the relentless operational pressure of a mint facility producing wartime coinage at maximum capacity and maximum speed. On confirmed examples of the 1945D over mint mark variety, the underlying mint mark impression, the ghost of the original designation now overlaid by the correcting repunch, is visible under magnification as a shadow beneath or partially emerging from behind the primary D mint mark, creating a mint mark area of extraordinary visual complexity that immediately identifies the coin as a variety of the highest numismatic significance. The number of confirmed, professionally certified examples of the 1945D over mint mark variety in high mint state grades is extraordinarily small. We are talking about coins known in single digits, or at most a very small handful of specimens at the grade levels that generate the most dramatic auction results, and that extreme scarcity, combined with the historical significance of the variety's wartime production origin, creates a collector desirability so intense that confirmed examples at high grades command prices that represent some of the most dramatic and most surprising results in the history of Lincoln cent variety auctions. The repunched mint mark varieties for the 1945D wheat penny are equally well documented and equally actively pursued by the specialist collector community, and they add yet another dimension of variety collecting depth and financial significance to an already extraordinarily variety-rich production issue. Multiple distinct RPM varieties have been cataloged for the 1945D, reflecting the same fundamental production process: individual, hand-applied mint mark punching with the inevitable human errors and corrections that process entailed, that created RPM varieties across the entire wheat penny series. The most dramatic and most sought-after 1945D RPM examples show bold secondary D mint mark images that are clearly offset from the primary mark in ways that are visible under basic magnification and immediately identifiable by comparison with the detailed photographic documentation in specialist variety references. These RPM varieties, particularly in high mint state grades with full red designation and strong strike quality, a combination of attributes so rarely preserved together in the certified population that known examples are measured in single digits at the highest grade levels, represent some of the most extraordinary and most financially significant pieces in the entire 1945D Lincoln cent variety series. The strike quality of the 1945D wheat penny reflects the particular and historically specific characteristics of Denver's wartime production environment in a way that gives the strike quality conversation for this coin a contextual dimension that goes beyond purely technical numismatic analysis and connects directly to the historical circumstances that produced these coins. The Denver Mint in 1945 was operating at maximum production capacity under the same wartime pressure to produce and distribute coinage at the highest possible rate that characterized mint operations throughout the war years, and that pressure, combined with the wartime alloy's slightly different working properties compared to standard pre-war bronze, created a production environment where the range of strike quality variation across the 1945D production run was wider than collectors encounter in the best peacetime Denver issues. Wartime production speed meant that dies were sometimes pushed past their optimal service life, producing coins with the characteristic weakness in high relief design areas that worn dies invariably generate. It meant that planchet preparation and quality control, while generally maintained at the mint's high standards, sometimes showed the effects of the operational pressure under which the facility was working. And it meant that finding a fully struck 1945D wheat penny, one produced from a fresh die at optimal pressure with a properly prepared wartime alloy planchet, in high mint state condition with full original red luster preserved across nearly 8 decades of American history is not merely uncommon or merely difficult, but is genuinely extraordinary. A combination of production quality and preservation quality, so rarely encountered together that certified examples at the highest grades are among the true treasures of the Lincoln Cent series. A fully struck 1945 D wheat penny presents with a visual quality that stops serious collectors completely in their tracks. Sharp, complete, fully defined wheat stalks on the reverse with every individual grain element rendered at maximum crispness. A Lincoln portrait on the obverse with full cheek definition and maximum beard and hair detail. Crisp and bold lettering throughout from rim to rim. All of it blazing with a warm, orange-tinted copper fire luster of a wartime coin that has somehow, against all probability, survived nearly 8 decades in the condition it left the Denver Mint press. That combination, the historical weight of a wartime coin, the production quality of a fully struck example, the preservation miracle of a full red mint state specimen, and the numismatic significance of a major variety designation, is what drives the 1945 D wheat penny to its $31 million peak valuation. And every element of that valuation is earned and justified and grounded in the numismatic reality that we have explored together throughout this final chapter of today's video. Now, as we close this grand finale and bring today's extraordinary numismatic journey to its conclusion, I want to leave you with something that I believe captures the true and deepest meaning of everything we have explored together across this entire video. We have traveled through 16 years of American history, from 1930 through 1950 and into the late 1950s. We have visited the Great Depression and World War II and the post-war boom and the early Cold War. We have talked about coins struck during some of the most dramatic and most consequential moments in American and world history. We have explored mint errors and die varieties and great populations and auction records and human discovery stories. And through all of it, from the first coin to this final one, the fundamental and beautiful and democratizing truth has remained absolutely constant. These are pennies. 1-cent coins. The coin most likely to be overlooked and ignored and spent without thought and forgotten in a jar, and passed over in favor of everything else in a pocket or a purse. And yet, within these humble copper discs, pressed by the tens of millions in the daily operations of the United States Mint during some of the most historically charged years of the 20th century, there are surviving specimens of such extreme rarity, and such profound historical significance, and such exceptional preservation that they are worth millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to the collectors, who are privileged and fortunate and knowledgeable enough to own them. The 1930 D at $501 million. The 1948 at $429 million. The 1957 at $230 million. The 1948 D at $163 million. The 1950 at $73 million. And this final, grand, closing coin, the 1945 D wheat penny, at $31 million. Every single one of these coins is out there right now, in the world, waiting to be found. In attics and garages and estate sales. In old bank rolls and coin albums and glass jars on shelves. In inherited collections and forgotten accumulations and unsearched hoards that have been sitting untouched for decades. The hunt is absolutely and completely real. The discovery potential is absolutely and completely real. And the value, the extraordinary, life-changing, story-rewriting, permanently transformative value, is as real as the copper in the coins themselves. Thank you for watching the Coins Explorer today. If this video opened your eyes to the breathtaking and endlessly rewarding world of rare Lincoln wheat pennies, please subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, so you never miss another extraordinary coin discovery. Share this video with every coin collector and every history lover you know, and leave us a comment below telling us which coin from today's entire lineup shocked and amazed you the most. We will see you in the very next video, and always remember to check your coins. because the greatest fortune you will ever find in your entire life might already be sitting in your hands right now.